Hello, good people of God. It feels very great to be here with you once again. Today, we decided to have a summary of the gift of the Spirit. So I'm here with
Obed Dikro.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. As a summary, I want us to have a Q&A session. So we are going to have a question and answer, but fast forward, we want to go through the gift of the Spirit. We want to go through all the gifts of the Spirit before we start with the Q&A session. So starting with the gift of revelation, we realize that the gift of revelation, we have the gift of the word of wisdom. That is the first one. The word of wisdom, we realize that is the supernatural revelation from God of his mind and his purpose. Yes, that was the gift of the word of wisdom. Then we move on to the word of knowledge. We realize that it is a supernatural revelation from God of any fact or event. That is the gift of knowledge. And then we went on to the gift of discerning of spirit. We realized that it is a supernatural revelation from God of the presence or activities of the spirit world. That is the gift of discerning of spirit. And then fast forward, we went to the gift of power. Power gift, we realized that we have the gift of faith being the first one. It is the supernatural power that is given by God for protecting us from harm and then from danger. Then we moved on to working of miracles. We realized that it is a supernatural power for producing signs and also wonders. The gift of working of miracles for producing signs and wonders. And then we moved on to gift of healings. We realized that it is a supernatural power that is given by God for removing diseases and then infirmities. The gift of healings is for removing diseases and infirmities. And the last category, we talked about the gift of inspiration or utterance gift. We realized that the gift of prophecy, which is the first one, it is a supernatural utterance that is inspired by God in a known tongue. Yeah, so prophecy is a known tongue. And then we moved on to tongues or diverse kinds of tongues. You realize that it's a supernatural utterance that is inspired by God in an unknown tongue. So it is the opposite of the gift of prophecy. So diverse kinds of tongues is an unknown tongue. And then we head on to the last one, which is the interpretation of tongues. You realize that it is a supernatural utterance that is inspired by God interpreting an unknown tongue. Yes, so we interpret in the interpretation of tongues. So these were the gifts, the 9 gifts of the Holy Spirit that we talked about. Papacy, you are welcome again.
Thank you very much.
Right. So may we take the subject of spiritual gift for our discussion?
Certainly, yes. It is an important subject. It needs to be discussed.
Oh, okay. So we want to know why the subject has not been discussed in our churches. Why is the subject being ignored?
It is to be admitted that the subject of spiritual gift has been greatly ignored in most of our churches. And we will say that after our discussion here, it will stimulate prayerful interest and people will be ready to discuss this in the church. It might be due to ignorance on account of this gift in the Bible. That is why. So it is good that we'll discuss it.
Okay, so is there not a great deal that is said concerning these gifts in the New Testament?
As this matter has thoroughly been discussed in the first episode of Corinthians chapter 12 and 14 and in the Romans. And this is where you will see that the epistles were written as the gifts of the Spirit, and it's a general exercise among the churches. So that is the reason why this will be understood further as we go on.
Oh, okay. So quickly, let me just go through these gifts, these 9 gifts of the Spirit. First one, we have the word of wisdom, we have the word of knowledge, we have faith, the gift of healings, working of miracles, prophecy, the discerning of spirits, diverse kinds of tongues, and the last one is interpretation of tongues. So we want to look at the gifts in the Old Testament. Are these gifts found in the Old Testament as well in the New Testament?
Yes, the first 7 are found in the Old Testament. It's only the last 2, that is the speaking in tongues, and then the interpretation of tongues that were added to it in the New Testament churches. So the first 7 are in the Old and plus 2 in the New, making it 9 of the gifts.
So why are the 2 added to the gift, making it 9? Because it was 7. So and then 2 has been added to it.
Thank you very much. You see, in the Old Testament, the children of Israel were moving in groups or they were in camps. So the Spirit of God was moving like a pillar of cloud among them. But when we come to the New Testament, they were scattered all over the world. If you read from the Acts, that they should go and spread the word to the uttermost part of the world. So these 2 has been added to it so that everybody, anywhere you are in the world, you also have access to the Spirit. The Spirit is no longer with a group of people in a camp. That is why the 2 has been added to it.
Okay, so speaking about the subject of tongues, does the Bible not say that it's going to be ceased? When you read 1 Corinthians 13 verse 8, it's clear that it's going to be ceased. So when will it cease?
Thank you. It will cease when we enter into the presence of the Lord. At the moment we see God through the dark glass, but we will see Him face to face. When we see Him face to face, then there will be limited prophecies, and our tongues with interpretation will no longer be needed.
Okay. Has it ever ceased in ages?
It has never ceased to flow, although there have been times when spiritual death has made us appear that the spring of revelation interpretation has completely dried up. But in the darkest ages, church history records instances of the supernatural, which led us to believe the supernatural manifestation of the Spirit has always been evidence in the church.
So what are the gifts that are mentioned in Ephesians chapter 4?
The Ephesians chapter 4, the mention of the gift that we mostly refer to as the fivefold ministry. That is the pastors, the evangelists, the apostles, the teachers, and then the prophets. And these are ministry gifts that the Lord gives to the church that are required to work for the manifestation of the Spirit.
So speaking of ministry gifts, we want to know the difference between the ministry gifts and then the gifts of the Spirit.
Yeah, the ministry gift, this is a supernatural endowed that God has given to the ministers to build up the church. And the Holy Spirit gives His manifestation to these ministers for the work which they are called to do. So if somebody is called to be a pastor, then that is the ministry, and then the Holy Spirit will give you the gift that you use to do your pastoral work effectively.
Great. Okay, so in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 4, it is stated that there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. So we want to know why the word says that there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit.
Thank you. The apostle is pointing out that although the gifts are so different from each other, their origin or the source of the Spirit is the same. That is why they say it's one.
So it means that they are not 9 spirits of God, but it's only one Spirit.
That is it. The gifts of the Spirit are various, but it's coming from the same source. The Holy Spirit manifests in 9 different and distinct ways by the same Spirit.
Okay.
Thank you.
So continuing to 1 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 6, it is there that there are diversities of operation, but it is the same God which worketh all in all. So we want to understand that phrase.
Thank you very much. The gifts function differently in each individual. For example, Elijah, working of miracles, he was associated with the mantle. Okay. And when you take Moses, his working was associated with the rod. He changed the rod into the serpent. And when you come to Samson, he has the supernatural, miraculous, physical strength to work for God. But in all this, we say that it is the Spirit that gives all, but they work in a different or diverse ways.
Oh, so that is the diversity of
operation.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so moving on to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 11, it reads that the same Spirit dividing to every man severally as he will. It was talking about the gift of the Spirit with the Holy Spirit. So we want to understand that verse.
Yes, thank you. Here we have the prerogative of the Spirit to give what the Spirit wills for us that is suitable for an individual. It is for us to covet earnestly for the best gift of the Holy Spirit. And it is the prerogative of the Holy Spirit to bestow these gifts as He will on us. So it is not us pinpointing any gift that I want this one, the Holy Spirit to give unto you, but the Holy Spirit, as He wills, that He will give unto you.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
That's really understanding. Okay, so speaking about the coveting earnestly the best gifts, see in the last verse of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, the apostle would show us a more excellent way. That was what was said. So the more excellent way, we want to know the more excellent way that apostle will show us.
Thank you very much. The more excellent way, it is to seek the love of God first and to desire the gifts of the Spirit in order that you may serve God better. This answer is actually given in chapter 14, verse 1. And I want to quote, follow after charity and desire spiritual gifts, unquote. If we put the spiritual gifts before the love of God, we shall make a serious mistake. The first and most important thing is love God first. Those who love God still normally desire the gifts of the Spirit, since they are manifestation of His Spirit given for His glory and the enrichment of the church. So the Spirit, you love God, and then you have the Spirit to the enhancement or enrichment of the church.
Oh, okay. So that is the more excellent.
That is the more excellent way. Thank you.
Okay, so Papacy, we want to have your final words for the gift of the Spirit, as you have gone through all the questions. We want to know your final words that you have for us.
Thank you very much. My final word is that the gift is needed for each and every individual who loves God. And this is recorded from the Old Testament and then the New Testament. So if you love God, then you need the gift of the Spirit to enhance or to enrich the church and to enrich the love that we have for each other for the development of the work of God.
All right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir. So thank you very much for staying to the end of the video. We would like to have more of this discussion. So kindly follow us on all our social media handles. The name is Kenneth Obeng Peprah. Papacy, thank you.
Thank you, sir.